Hello. Nice to see you. Hey. My name is Beth Sherman. I'm a clinical professor of social work at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. And the reason that I was invited is because, like, my particular area of work is related to to education, school social work, and educational rights, frankly. So I've worked for a long time. My path to sort of teaching was very much through work. So when anyone asks me, like, what do I do? I always say I'm a social worker. I forget to mention that I teach, because that's my background, is practice, and particularly in schools. So what I wanted, what seems really important to talk about is for us to understand what children and youth rights are to education under particular laws. And the reason that I always want to start with, like, the rights aspect of it is that oftentimes when we're trying to get accommodations or services and supports in schools, there's a little bit of a feeling that we're sort of asking for something that's sort of special in some way for the children. And I just think it's really important that a lot of people have fought for a really long time for educational access, and that it really is both a civil rights issue and a disability rights issue. And so the more that we can hold schools accountable and get them used to providing accommodations and services, the more likely that kids can have academic success. And as we know, academic success is so important for the rest of one's life. So that's sort of where I come from in terms of my stance on this. So today what we're going to do is I am primarily going to talk about the Individuals with Disabilities Educational Act, so IDEA. And so primarily I am going to be talking about the special ed evaluation process, although I will start by touching on what's 504. Because for anyone who was here for the previous session, the clinical psychologist talked about this, that there are two different methods for ensuring that kids have educational access. And one of them is 504, which is civil rights law, which says that people with disabilities can't be barred, can't have sort of their access barred to public institutions, one of them being education. So that's 504, disability rights. And then there's also special ed law that says that all students have a right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So we'll get into this. So first of all, learn about rights. There are also 4 special ed evaluations. There are 4 questions that need to be answered for a kid to qualify. And it's really, really important that families and students, as their own advocates, know what these questions are and how to demonstrate to the school what the students' needs are. And then the last one is just ways to advocate for rights under IDEA particularly. So I will, this is always my knowledge is power. And again, I've worked in school systems. I admire school systems. Some of my best colleagues in the world are teachers and other school personnel. And at the same time, providing accommodations and certainly services, it's an expensive and time-consuming process, and also it's very particular and individualized, and this is not always our model. Our model for education is more group models and sort of people meet, large groups of people meeting certain benchmarks. And so part of what we're doing is really trying to get individual access for individual students, which isn't always the way that schools think about things. So find out what your rights are and also what your kids' rights are in terms of education. And also if you know what the difference, because for any of you maybe who are already involved with special ed, there's all this lingo. For like IEPs, there's METs, there's FUBAs, there's BIPs, it's like going to another place where you don't know the language. So really knowing, and a lot of times also once you get started in school, people just sort of start throwing these terms around. And so it's like, wait, can you say what that means? And so just kind of knowing special ed. And one family that I worked with, that child had a lot of medical stuff going on, she's like, oh yeah, I'm multilingual, I speak cardiology, I speak rheumatology, I speak special ed, I speak, so it's another language. And then for sure you're your child's best advocate, and then of course as they grow, they're their own best advocates. And so part of what, which is so important just developmentally, is the more that our kids see us advocating for them, the more that they also come to learn the language and they realize what their rights are and are more able to do their own advocacy as they progress through school and be into college, et cetera, and beyond, and work situations, because there are civil rights laws related to work accommodations as well. So just the language of accommodations is very helpful. And then also it's just very important to kids' development and well-being. And earlier, there was the talk earlier, a mother asked, what do I do if my child is too embarrassed to get accommodations? And, part of that is because of disability rights. We're working always in this country about that people are different, people have different needs, and that this isn't about special treatment. It's just about being able to get at the starting line, or get, to be in there, to be at the table, and to be able to speak at the table. So I think this sort of thing about this is not a shameful, I'm not going to say that we can take away all the stigma or all the shame, and certainly kids at various points of their life really struggle, of course, and just with the differences in terms of their identity and their lived experience. But the more I think that we can just sort of normalize the conversation and role model for the kids the conversation, the more likely that they can be their own advocates and also feel righter, in terms of their place in the world. So those are my reasons. All right, so now we go, so here, I'm not going to talk about 504, but if you want to, I'm going to talk just this about 504. But there's lots of really good resources related to 504. So 504, this is some of the basics. This is the definitions, okay? So the definition of a 504 plan is for a child who has a physical or emotional disability, and then they have this other piece about chemical dependency, because in the past, people with chemical dependencies weren't included. Kids with chemical dependencies weren't included. So kids with a physical or emotional disability, it's for a child that has, okay, so this exists. And in the case, also just listen, I know with medical models, we're talking more about disease, right? The medical model is disease. With education, we're talking about disability. And so it can be a bit of a mind shift, because many people don't necessarily identify their disease as a disability, but just sort of legally, this is the legal channel. So that there's some sort of a physical or emotional disability, and also so that there's a condition that impacts a major life activity. Okay, so it's having the condition and that the condition impacts a life activity. Because, a lot of people have something that doesn't necessarily impact. So the definition under 504 is that there's, usually with the definitions, there's a medical diagnosis, and then there's documentation that it's impacting one area of their development or their activities. So, since we're talking about school today, this would be about education, that it's impacting their education. But it also might be that it's impacting other areas, but just it's making sense. So it's the diagnosis plus definition. There's documentation that it impacts one area of functioning. These are the areas. And then that it will ensure that the person has access to the environment. It doesn't talk about services and supports, which is more special ed. This is just that barriers are removed from the child being able to access. So for example, preferential seating, maybe being able to sit at a different place, being able to leave the classroom in order to take medication or manage diet. Okay, so that would be an accommodation. You're not really asking for a service, you're just saying, my student needs to be able to leave the classroom in order to do this. And then you don't, for 504 plan, there isn't a special goals. So there aren't special services. There aren't people assigned. With special ed, there actually can be services assigned, and there's goals, and there's services and supports. But with 504, it's just that you have the right to access the environment and that things can't impinge on your right to do so. And then this is the sort of the critique in some way of 504 is that parents have really specific rights under special ed that you don't have under 504. It's literally just to remove barriers for the student to be able to access the education. And there's a lot less safeguards because it's more just sort of, okay, the kid has this disability, they have an impairment or lack of access in one area, and then they have the plans written up to say, well, you can do this, that, and the other thing in order to accommodate your disability. Is that all right? Okay. You can, and just again, the whole knowledge is power. You can go to the Department of Education, look on their websites about what are the rights under 504. There's tons, but there are a lot of parent resources. Are some people familiar with 504 plans? And would you just want to say, like, where did you get the information about 504s, or where do you get that?
I got a lot of my 504 plan information from the GSD conference in the year past. And then I supplement with my own research through the Department of Education and then looking on my school district's website about what the criteria were. So when I came in and said, hey, I want a 504, I laid everything out. They're like, okay. And like, no questions asked. They're like, you know, you had everything prepared, you did your research, we asked questions, and it's been a really good experience with my school district.
Good. So. And when you said that you got the information from other conferences, were there any websites or anywhere in particular handouts or info?
I think the year that the AGSD did a conference like virtually, there was a seminar that specifically talked about schools and working with schools, and that's where I learned my 504 plan information from there. So I don't know if the AGSD website still has that available or if you can request it, but that's where I got a lot of my, you know, kind of entry level, you know, knowledge of what's the difference between the IEP and a 504. So which one do I need to advocate for? And, you know, because my son doesn't qualify for an IEP.
Right.
Because he doesn't, you know, he got tested for those like criteria that they required. And so I was like, all right, so that really cut a lot of my research because I knew right off the bat what I needed to work with.
Okay, good. How'd you find out about 504s or what are good resources?
The social worker at the school helped me with the process, but I mean, honestly, we were given one for a diabetic and I had to modify it.
Yeah, all right, good. And I'm happy actually to look into, like I haven't been on the AGSD website, but I'd be happy to think about like how just dropping in some of those resources there about just good websites, because there are various ones that can be very helpful. All right, good. So the point to be made is that sure, you can ask the school, and the school may be able to refer you to someone who will be or not even incredibly helpful, but a lot of times, you know, as you've mentioned, it's really that goes back to the knowledge is power. Just kind of knowing, you know, what the law is and what the procedures are. And also the thing about 504 plans is unlike the IEPs, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's not really specified who's in charge of 504s. It's unfunded. Like special ed is funded, but 504 is a law, but it's not funded. So it can be a lot of different people. Sometimes it's social work, sometimes it's the counselors, sometimes it's the principals. It's just sometimes just know that the public schools, that there's an obligation for them to provide someone to help you write a 504 plan. So schools can't say we don't have 504 plans. They have to. I mean, they might not, but they need to. Does that make sense? Yeah, because sometimes I hear that, oh, my school, it's like they do, it's just buried somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here's the IDEA. So and I'm hoping that it's relevant about, well, I don't know, I'm back. I realize in hindsight that I probably wanted to do more and probably should have done more on 504s and IEPs, but here I am. So I do want to talk to you about IEPs, and because it's important in a lot of the ways that kids get their educational needs met. So IDEA was enacted actually in the mid-70s, and prior to 1970s, the mid-70s, kids with disabilities in this country didn't have a right to education. Some were receiving education access, but a lot of times kids weren't. And it's just because they didn't have the right. I mean, it was not a specified right under special education law. So in 75, the law was passed, and at the time it was called EHA, Education of Handicapped Children Act. It's been changed because handicap is kind of outdated language. But what the key pieces of it is that every student in the state, so it's state-driven, every student has the right to a free and appropriate public education. And then there's this other piece, which is least restrictive environment. So what that's getting to is that the kids have the right to the maximum extent possible to be educated with their non-disabled peers. So that means just kind of putting all kids who might have some specialized needs or special education, putting them sort of in separate classrooms or sort of making these big distinctions is not allowed. And so, for example, too, like I worked with a student that the field trip was saying that the kid couldn't go because they didn't feel like they had enough access to the things that the student might need. But once the plan was developed, like we could come up with a plan about what was needed. It was just because people were nervous. But once you came up with a plan and it was written and, you know, all bases were covered, then you could say, well, the student has to be able to go. I mean, and not of course if they didn't want to or their family didn't feel comfortable, but the school couldn't say, well, this student can't go because we can't accommodate this or that. So this is something that's a little bit helpful with IDEA because it really that once a student is identified under IDEA as a student with a disability, you just have more, they have more rights, not more rights, the same rights, but they have the right to certain things that they can't be excluded from educational experiences. So, so it's a free and appropriate public education in LRE, least restrictive environment. It's been, this is not so probably important to all of us, but the important thing is that every student under Child Find has the right to be evaluated as a student potentially with a disability. So this is another thing too, that kids, like a really important thing about IDEA is it gives people, the students, the right to an evaluation. So it doesn't give them a right to qualification, as you talked about. They don't have, you know, the evaluation has to qualify a student. But a school really, if you request an evaluation, the school can't say, no, we're not doing that. So, I mean, we can get into that, but I just want people to know that under Child Find, and it's actually from birth. So that IDEA, there's a birth mandate, so children from birth, and depending on what state you live in, it might be till 21, but in Michigan, it's 26. Some states have like an older mandate. So in Michigan, we have, where I'm from, is we have 0 to 26, but a lot of states are 0 to 21. That there's these mandates for children to be students to be located, evaluated, and identified. Okay, so they have this. They also have the right to have equal access to education, and also that once a student is qualified as a student with a disability under IDEA, they have to have an IEP, and an IEP is an individual educational plan. And lays out goals and benchmarks, and then the school is obliged to provide those services and supports. So my son has, well, several of my kids have disabilities, but my son has a medical disability, and he has an IEP. But then he, like, sort of going through classes, and this one class, things were going very poorly, so I go to talk to them, and they're like, oh, he didn't tell me. No, sorry. Nice try, you know. But no, that's not the way. I mean, it's good. It's really good for students to be able to be old enough and to know what their accommodations are. That's great. But this is a kind of a nice thing, is that once a student's qualified, the onus is really on the school to provide those services. So I'm always grinning because I really like when people have rights. And, you know, and I also really like when there are systems that we can actually hold accountable for it. Not like in a bad and mean way, but just like, you know, this is the law. This is the kid's right. So it's not like whether the kid tells you or not, that's not that's not what it is, that's not the law. So anyway, interesting, as always, interesting conversations. So, okay. And again, there's this thing about emulating as closely as possible the experiences of non-disabled kids. So as much as possible, we're saying that kids, as closely as possible, have the experience of any other student at the school. Okay, so I already said this, so about kids' rights, and they're identified, located, evaluated. Okay, so the next piece is that okay, so then the question becomes like yes,
I
please.
just have a quick question, just with what we were just talking about. Like, a lot of our kids' needs are food related,
Mhm.
and like snacks throughout the day, or like needing a shake, things like that. Are any of these, like any of the IDA stuff, like would that impact how, like being able to eat in the classroom instead of having to go, to another room, or, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. It's interesting and sort of infuriating probably too as a parent at the same time, is that it really depends on how a student qualifies. Like if they qualify under a 504, then what the accommodation would be is that the school will not be able to say that the student can't bring snacks into class, or that they can't leave the class to have their food-related needs met. So they can't put a barrier to that. With an IEP, it might be scheduled in actually, like when and that's, so it's a little, I can't really, I keep going like this because part of it is, you have to sort of start, that's sometimes also a decision, like sometimes kids start out with 504 plans because, it's more about accommodations, so we try that, but then if things are getting increasingly tricky and more barriers are being put in, that's when I really think that a special ed evaluation can be very useful.
Okay.
So, that would be my answer to that, yeah.
So two things. First, AV-wise, if you could speak into the microphone.
Oh,
that would be good.
shoot.
That way we're recording.
Thank you,
okay.
thank you. Just, thank you.
No problem. And secondly, I was wondering about is there a specific list of the qualify, certain conditions, or is it more open? My daughter, besides having GSD, struggles with anxiety, social anxiety and stuff that's really triggering her, and then she's been, despite trying really hard, failing math.
Mm-hmm.
And I had experience with this going back to third grade.
Yep.
As far as having troubles. And she's studying every single day, getting tutored. She did all the homework, and she bombed the actual tests.
Yep.
The teacher tried to be as accommodating as possible. So it's I don't want to villainize the teacher at all. But it's
That's good.
He gave her more time to be able to do it. On the final, he gave her a open book.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we know she knew this stuff because she was studying we were
Right.
tutors, and she still failed the final, and so she failed the class, and so now she has to take summer school.
Yeah.
And so
That's
I
not
just
good.
didn't know well, is it a specific list of conditions, or can it be some more hey, it's anxiety or just having difficulty with this that
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's a way to change it up so that way the exams aren't weighted so much within the class, but maybe there's another way to demonstrate comprehension.
Yeah, just in terms of special education, okay, for 504 plans, it just says a medical condition, and then it gives a list of it says maybe asthma, it has ADHD, it has a little bit of a list, but the legislation takes great pains to say that it's not exhaustive. So for 504 plans, there's a list, like you said, a list, but it says this is by no means exhaustive. So we're just giving you examples, but the other conditions, if there's a condition and also there's a impairment, it's getting in the way of functionality. The thing is, with special ed law, which is your question is so perfect, which we can skip this, but the first, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Because your question is really good. Okay. For IDEA, for the Individuals with Disability Educational Act, there are 14, there are 14 areas of disability. And so the student, the child, what's going on with them has to be marshaled into one of these areas. Okay? So what you're, here, no, this is like, I'm not good at this. Okay, so a lot of times for GSD, the qualification would be under OHI, which is otherwise health impaired. Okay? Because OHI, the definition of OHI, which I'll get into in a minute, it says a medical condition that's impacting the student's performance in various areas. Okay? What you're talking about, which is very interesting, in special ed law, there are two ways to approach this under special ed. It's possible that kids they might need some accommodations related to GSD, but it's also possible that they might have something else going on. So, sometimes kids have specific learning disabilities in math. And it can be, like, we don't know entirely whether or not these things are related or they're unrelated, and in some ways it doesn't matter. So I guess what my advice to you would be, if I may, is that I would ask for an evaluation for your daughter, because under special ed, because you've already described that the teacher's doing a nice job with accommodations. They gave her extended time, they gave her open notes. So the fact that there's still, and I won't go on to your business, but especially if there's some sort of a pattern emerging, because there are ways to test whether or not there's a specific learning disability related to math. You also mentioned that the students are struggling with anxiety or depression. It sounds like from what you're saying that partly I think it would be really helpful if she got evaluated to see what's going on with her math.
So do you do that at the school, like for schoolwork part?
Yes, okay, so now we can get back to, yeah, please do it.
So our son struggled with math as well, and we did a neuropsych eval. While he was being evaluated, his blood sugar dropped. And so his test scores were skewed. So we have it now, so he qualifies under the OHI. And in his plan, it is written that before any test is given, you must test the blood sugar and make sure that it is at a level that we deem reasonable to be testing, because we noticed his anxiety was huge when it came to math. Math is where his struggle is as well.
No, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that you did get that service support part of the plan through an IEP. So he did have to qualify under special ed. Good.
Yep.
Awesome. That's so good. Yes, please.
No, it's just related to, it's really short. It's related to what I was asking. So one of our son is now going into middle school. He's, and one of the district nurses told me that since he's going to middle school, like he'll still have an appointment to get his shake at a certain time with a nurse, but the nurse wouldn't chase him down because he's getting older and more responsible, which as a mom, well, it pissed me off. So,
No.
And I
Nope.
was just wondering, like,
Nope.
legally, is there a?
Yeah, this is,
That seems very.
okay. Does your son have a 504 or an IP?
So now
Okay.
it's like-
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because that's probably as a social worker, right? So I think about discrimination rights, and that's a very ableist thought that just, sort of discriminate against people with disabilities, that somehow because you're reaching a developmental age, suddenly you have that. And, you were here for the neuropsych person talking about what we know is for GSD and for other disorders, or I'm sorry, I'm like struggling. I want to say metabolic is probably not the right word, but it is. So that whole executive functioning, she talked really specifically attention and executive functioning. So just to me, anytime, this isn't just for GSD or OHI, anytime that somebody's saying a student shouldn't need that because developmentally blah blah blah, that's not the way it works. This is a really almost crass analysis, but it's like we're basically saying, well, the person's like 17, they shouldn't need a wheelchair anymore. They need more increased, I mean, we would be like, what? But somehow with other stuff, we take it. And also sometimes the more things are hidden, and also the more that people just think like, oh, it's, medical, like you were saying about, someone was just talking to me about just the role of stress, period, in terms of glycogen. I mean, in terms of just stress. So, this is we know, it's evolving. So I would say that, it's sad to me that you all are pushed now, since it sounds like you haven't needed a 504 and IEP. But, I guess the silver lining is that if you get one, it will protect your student into middle school and college and beyond. So, yeah. People, it's just, it's people don't get it when they say stuff like that. It's infuriating. Okay, so here's the thing. There's a referral, there's the evaluation, there's an eligibility determination, and if the student is found to be a student with a disability, there's an IEP, and then the IEP is written, the services and supports are written, and then there are annual reviews. So, I'm just trying to make this stand up. Okay, so the next thing is this. Okay, the way that kids can be identified is that the students and the parents or the guardian can request an evaluation. The school professionals can request an evaluation, but it has to be the only one who can the only way an evaluation can move forward is a parent has to give consent. So someone cannot evaluate your student for special education without informed parental consent. So that's just important. And then also the other thing about the evaluation is that under the law it says it has to be given in a reasonable amount of time. Is there any way to adjust the mic so that it's staying sort of? Oh well, maybe it's staying sort of. Maybe I just am. Yeah, just that. Actually, it's fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry to get you up here. Thanks. So, it has to be a reasonable amount of time. So once a written request is placed for an evaluation, then the school has 30 school days. For 30 school days for kids 3 to, I say 26 because I'm Michigan, but 3 to 21, so 30 school days. But if kids are younger than 3, it's 45 calendar days. And that's just important because little kids' development, like a lot can happen. And because special ed evaluations stop about 45 days really, before the school year ends. So if you request an evaluation in the beginning of June, they will say, we can't do it because we don't have 30 school days to do so. Okay, but then the request can go in for the following year. But if the child is under 3, then it's 45 calendar days, so they can be done over the summer. All right. So so that's that. And the thing about how do you request? And I will get this on the ASG website. The way that you request an evaluation, it can be verbally, but there's been laws passed in many places that it has to be written. I haven't done a state study, but I know there was a big change in Michigan because a lawsuit was won because the parent requested it with witnesses and they didn't do it. And so then the law changed, it has to be written. So anyway, it's just sort of anecdotally, it's like, they were anyway. So there's this. It's basically you just put in there that your student's name, their birthday, your address, what areas are you concerned in terms of there might be a disability, and you write that in. What your concerns are, and then you can give it to the principal. You can give it to the special director of special ed. Some people send the letter. Some people email it. Some people send it certified mail. I mean, it just depends. It's up that, but keep a copy and a record that you sent it. Then the school has to contact you and say, okay, we need to perform a read, which is a review of existing evaluation data. And they basically will go over. So to the dad who says, well, the teacher's, she's doing this, that, and the other thing, it's great because then you have documentation, what's been tried. Okay, so there's a review, what do we know? And then the next step would be an evaluation. The school may say, we don't have enough information to do and even go to an evaluation, which is okay, but then what you say to them is, okay, well then what's the plan gonna be? And what's the timeline? Because if they say we don't have enough information to do an evaluation, then we need to get each other on the record. Okay, so what else would need to happen? They can't just say we don't have enough information, all right? I'm talking badly about schools, and I'm such a school person, but it's like, yeah, you just got to advocate sometimes. Okay, so there's a third, you can put, sometimes you won't be the person writing the letter, sometimes the school will say, we notice so-and-so is really struggling, we think it would be helpful to do an evaluation, we've tried this, this, and this, so can we do an evaluation, and then you consent. So it depends, but it depends more. What I hear for kids with GSD is that it's often the families that are initiating it rather than the schools that are sort of noticing and suggesting. So, okay, so then we go to an evaluation. So the evaluation is a multidisciplinary team is assigned, and it is in all areas related to the kid's suspected disability. It's not all areas. Okay, so we're not doing an evaluation across the board. That's why it matters sort of what you write your concerns are, and then there's a team assembled, and this team is going to be like a teacher, and then a school psychologist, maybe social work, someone to look at academic achievement. So it depends on what for example, if it's a speech, if there's a speech concern, speech therapy is a question, then the speech therapist would be there. So it's all areas. So the next thing is that the evaluation results need to be used to determine eligibility. So what I just want to mention is that with this multidisciplinary team, what's really important is when this evaluation is going on and you're being interviewed as the parent or guardian or what have you, make sure that the records, the medical records you have, or any recommendations from for anybody basically related to their needs and their is that you have to make sure that that gets into this record, because the evaluation team won't just take like an outside record and come to the meeting. It has to be funneled through this team. So just a really quick example is that I worked with a student who had ADHD, and they had been seeing private therapists and actually a psychiatrist. But then the school at the IEP, they were like, well, we don't really have any information about this student really having trouble in school, because the people on the team hadn't reached out, or they weren't consent signed to get things together. Well, thankfully, the year before, the school had filled out a whole checklist which allowed the kid to get diagnosed with ADHD. So the family had to stop the IEP, produce this form to people on the team and say, well, you all filled this form out and said there are all these problems going on, so you have to funnel it into the evaluation. Does it make sense? If this is too technical, just stop me. All right? All right? So I'm just trying to explain that all the information that exists out there, in a special ed evaluation, it has to be funneled through this team because they make the determinations. And it can be bewildering to families, especially if there's a lot of medical concerns and it's very obvious that the student's missing tons of days and they need some accommodations and supports. But unless that documentation gets into the team through either the school psychologist or the social worker or the teacher or somebody, then the school might not consider it. So the determination has to be made by this team. So then the next thing is that the evaluation results have to be used to make the determination. So we already talked about this. The most relevant special ed categories today probably are going to be related to OHI, otherwise health impaired. So that's a medical diagnosis, plus it's impacting areas of the kid's education. And the other one might be early childhood developmental delay. And I won't, just for time, I won't speak on that a lot, but for people of young kids, it's, and I'm happy to talk afterwards if people are interested in that. or another time. All right. So otherwise health impairment, limited strength, vitality, alertness. I mean, and you have to realize these were written in the 1970s. So the language is a little bit like, oh, I mean, I think would write things a little differently now. They don't change a lot. So vitality, alertness, but anyway, it says is due to a chronic or acute health problem such as. So there's this list, but just note that it just says such as. It's not exhaustive. Okay, so we have ADHD, we have asthma, we have other things, but just because GSD isn't on here, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't count, because it's just such as. It's okay? So, and then the next piece is that it adversely affects the student's educational performance. Yeah? Okay. So the next piece is, okay, this is ECDD, I won't go into that. So here are the 4 questions. The first one, to this question about like what's the definition of what categories or symptoms, et cetera. So here are the 4 questions. The student has to have, like, whatever's going on with them has to be marshaled into one of those 14 categories. Okay, so either OHI, specific learning disability, et cetera. And then the next question that has to be asked is the kid not making effective progress in school. So that has to be answered as well. And so I'm sorry to keep going back to your little question, but it was so helpful. So, the question is, are they not making effective progress in school? And it is heartbreaking to me that she has to go to summer school, sorry. So, I mean, it's not, whatever. And then you have to say, is the lack of progress related to the disability? So this is where the situation might get a little bit, you'd have to demonstrate that the lack of progress, it does relate to the disability, and that has to be figured out through an evaluation by the school. And then also, this is the final one, does the student require specially designed instruction or related services? And this is sometimes where the 504 versus the IEP stuff come in, because you can be answering yes to all this, but if you can't demonstrate that the student requires something specialized, then they wouldn't qualify. And so some of these other ones may be more like a 504 plan would be sufficient. Sorry? So these are the 4 things that have to be answered by the team. And part of the way that you can determine if a student requires something is that you've tried other things and it hasn't been sufficient. So this is where sometimes things fall apart, is that's why we have to hold the school accountable for documenting. So I just encourage parents to start, if their kids are struggling, to start requesting documentation of it and like what the accommodations have been, what we've tried, so that it's clear what's been tried already. Okay? Yes?
For eligibility, if you say qualify under ADHD, like if you have a neuropsych eval done and it's determined that, can the accommodations and everything under the IEP also include the things related to a medical condition, or do they both have to be qualifying?
Okay. It's okay because you just picked ADHD out of the hat, maybe. But the infuriating thing is ADHD is not. It's not one of the it's not infuriating, it's just weird. But OHI. So if a kid qualified under ADHD, they would have to be qualified under OHI. Okay? But what your question, and similar, is this whole question of if your student qualifies one way, can they be provided services for other areas? Now, I think as we get smarter, I think that we will start figuring out a couple of things. One is how much the GSD with attention and stress and the whole role of that in terms of learning, and what the neuropsych person was talking about, is that I think maybe we'll get smarter about figuring out like the complex interactions, because it does seem like kids they do have the executive functioning, the attention difficulties, and also some of the it does seem like some of maybe the math or some of the learning stuff can be. It's just kind of there, and we don't know. Like, is it separate? Is it this? So, to answer your question, it slightly depends, because in a lot of places, it depends on how you want to get the student qualified, because if you can document that their qualification is related to the GSD, then they can have other kinds of supports and services. But the part with the question 2 is that or 3 is that you have to demonstrate that the difficulty the kid's having is a result of the disability. So in some cases, if it does look like it's attention and they have the ADHD diagnosis, you might just try to wrap everything into the services into other, just that one qualification. And also part of the reason I'm stumbling is that some states allow dual qualifications. In Michigan, we don't. But you should check with your state to see if kids can be qualified under having a specific learning disability and OHI. And I don't know off the top of my head which states do that, but you can sure find out. Did that answer your question-ish, or not really? I don't think so. Can you ask me one more time?
Well, my son is going to be doing a neuropsych eval, just because of his kind of behavior and issues at school. And I obviously don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, but it's going to be before the school year starts. So I was trying to figure out how to navigate, if that does become a factor, how would I navigate this, having 2 conditions that could be impacted.
Yeah. Because right now you said that your son has a 504 plan, and that's specifically related to GSD?
Yes.
So, okay. But you all have noticed that there's some additional things going on, attention otherwise, and so that's partly why you're doing the neuropsych. And is the neuropsych, and we don't know, right? But are they going to be sensitive enough to try to tease out GSD or other kinds of ADHD, like attention deficit disorder? Like, is it at a...
So, I mean, our metabolic specialist did the referral.
Okay, good. So, yeah, and you know what? I also would, frankly, like going into that evaluation, I would really ask them. I mean, it may seem like maybe it's not, a great question to ask, but I think it's like such an important question you're asking, and they have the chops to do it because they are specialists. So I would ask them, because that might help because that report that you're having done, that will be, if you decide to go the next step of requesting an IEP, that report will need to come in to that evaluation, and that might help determine which way to go. I mean, just to say it out loud, the fact that it's OHI, that he already has an OHI, and ADHD would go under OHI, that might help you a little bit. Because it's not required, the services need to match what the needs are. It's not like a matchy of the diagnosis with schools. So I would ask them to comment on that specifically.
So I have a question then. So like at our school district, our son qualified under health.
Otherwise health impaired, yeah.
Yep, with dyslexia and ADHD. But then they continued with his 504 just for his GSD, so we have both.
Oh, nice. Okay. Cool. That's yeah, I've heard of it. Sure. That's good. And I mean, it's kind of helpful too, because IEPs kind of expire when kids graduate, because it's just, it's a school, like a primary and secondary school. So in a way, it can be nice that he has a 504.
Well, and it's written in his IEP, like anything related to the GSD, it says C504.
Nice. That's really good. It sounds like there's very sensitive and integrated care. So that's good to know. Maybe that would be a step for other families as well. But you were able to get him evaluated, and so the other disabilities were. And do you know, so is it all under OHI, or it's all under OHI?
Yeah.
And did you say there was a specific learning disability?
Dyslexia.
But they kept it all under OHI?
They did.
Okay. So some states might have dual enrollment, but it sounds like, I'm not sure, but in your state, it sounds like they did that. And so are there specific accommodations for the dyslexia as well?
Yes.
Okay, good. I mean, that would be sort of an ideal situation, yeah? Okay. And again, okay, so it doesn't mean again. All right, so I think we're just about out of time, so let me just see where we're, so just in brief, once the important thing to know is that once all this evaluation stuff happens, there's something called a MET, which is a multidisciplinary educational team, and let me put that slide up so you can see it. Let's see, this would be right here. Let's see, come on. Okay, so the team, including the student, talk about the student's needs. You set annual goals, but the MET is called a multidisciplinary educational team. So the evaluation happens, and then there's a meeting where whether or not the student is going to qualify is discussed. And at that meeting, those are the 4 questions. So do they have a disability? Are they having problems in school? Is the problems in school related to the disability, and do they require specialized services? And the parents are on that team. So you're a member of that team. And so the really important thing that I would just encourage you to do is, schools are getting a little bit better about this, but they really should give you their evaluation results before the meeting. Like practice used to be that parents came, and that we would just, oh, it's so bad, we would just slide the paperwork. It was bad. Just slide it across to the parents, and so then the parents are going to have to be trying to read it and get their heads together and then participate in this meeting. So make sure that your documentation, that you get the documentation at least 24 hours. I mean, I think more, but at least 24 hours before the meeting, so you have a chance to read it. And whenever I'm doing evaluations, I get it to the families early, and I encourage them to ask me questions before the meeting so that they can feel really prepared. But, everybody's practice is different. And because the parent is an active team member, and even though, like, you walk into the room and it can be very intimidating, all these professionals sitting around, they're also talking about your child. Hopefully they remember that they're talking about our children. Sometimes they don't. But then you can really advocate. You can really participate and advocate for their needs in those meetings. All right. I think just in the interest of time, because it is time, and I want to I want to hear any additional questions. But and if this is too much, just tell me, because I do see some young people in the room. So would anybody just be willing to talk about what this process has been like, or what's, I know it was like, yeah, because the ultimate thing also is for people to be able to advocate for their own needs, as we get older, to be able to, like, once you have these role models about what your rights are, and you've been in meetings and you know what your needs are. I always, my kids have IEPs, and so them just knowing what works best for them in terms of their learning has really helped them. So, yeah, Avery.
So I just wanted to say this was great. I have an IEP. It's actually a 504 plan now because I'm in college.
Mm-hmm.
But I just didn't know all the history of this and just even the steps necessarily to take to get to it. My mom is a really great advocate for me, and I've learned to advocate for myself, but just having all of this information is extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to use, like, having IEPs in high school? Were you able to advocate for yourself?
I was, yeah. I think just having a foundation that's laid out was extremely helpful, because then I knew, like, the basis of what legally I was required to have, and then just making sure that those things were met, because I did need them, and I later found out, like, how important it is to have them and how helpful it can be. It's hard and it can be stressful. It's like anxiety provoking to go up and tell someone, like, oh, I feel like you're not meeting my accommodations, but as time goes on, it does get easier.
Great, thanks. No, it's cool. It's fine. Part of the reason that I ask is because I do just want to live, I want us to create and to continue to create a world where, like, this is like a lot of people's lives, and it's a lot of people's rights, and it's like people who don't get it, you know, like, sometimes people just will, like, one of my daughter has dyslexia, and the teacher was like, I'm not going to give her this or that accommodation because that's not the real world. And I was like, this sure, I didn't say hell, but I said, this sure as hell is the real world for her right now. So, you know, nice try. That's always my thing. In my mind, I'm like, nice try. So, you know, it's really crucial that, that to decrease any sense of stigma and shame about it, because it's like, we're all different, we all have different needs, and just because a lot of people learn one way or their bodies work another way, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. So thanks for, and thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Can I just share one other thing?
Yeah, sure.
We've had a tough road with schools. The biggest thing that we have learned is that the schools have their lane that they want to stay in, and we have ours, and how do you bridge that gap? And that's the hardest part, I think, as a parent, of how to make it come across that you are not fighting against them.
Yeah, like it's a we. Like we want the same things.
That's what it came to, and we wound up in court.
Yeah.
And we got what we wanted, but it took 3 years. So.
I really appreciate you saying that too, and I realized like when we started and you were talking, I was like, oh, your district's really good, and the thing is, you fought like a bear.
And we still do.
Yeah, pound of flesh. And you know, this is the thing also for parents. This is like the hidden burden of just like, yeah, you have to fight. You do, and you have to do it because it's your kid and you're going to do it. But it's a lot of stress.
But for us, we didn't know, they did not give us our parental rights to start with. And that's what led to the court cases, because they denied us stuff and we were able to prove it.
Oh, so they didn't give you...
They did not give us the parental handbook.
Procedural guidelines.
Yep, and our school district got in big trouble for it.
Okay. Good job. I know. I mean, I say good job, but I know it's stressful because you don't want to be against your child's school. But sometimes, you know, we just have to, because we have to help them do what's right. So thank you.
Yeah, because they were telling us with his GSD, like, oh, let's not have him go to FIAD or recess.
Sorry.
And that's illegal.
That is.
And that's what we fought 3 years for.
Oh my gosh. I know. It's like, why, you know, we always think why, but you said, right? Well, thank you. And I know we're ending. Anyone who needs to, please don't feel shy if you need to go, and I know we're ending.
So people know, they left because there's 10 minutes to check out, so if you haven't checked out, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I better get
Don't worry about it, but just,
thank you.
just that last, the eligibility determination, that last one, do they require specially designed instruction? How do you know that as a parent? I mean, or is that something that the teachers would, because I don't know. That seems like a hard one to prove as a parent.
Well, prove, but you know what? This is where it's really good that you all are connected. I mean, this is why this community is so great, because part of it is learning. Because how would you know? And how would you know what's possible? So unfortunately, and I didn't even get it at the very end, and I will share my slides. There are resources, like there's a website called Rights Law. I mean, I can do this. I know we're ending, but so maybe I'll just stop. But yeah, there's an organization called Rights Law that it's two lawyers. I think it's interesting that their last name are Rights, W-R-I-G-H-T Law, and they have a lot of possible accommodations. So you can, because partly you maybe would have more of a sense if you sort of knew a little bit of a sample.
Okay.
I talked to other people. I mean, I know it's difficult with rare diseases, and that's why it's so cool that there's this community. But yeah, just try to talk to other parents. There's also something called Understood, which is I would just start looking around for possible supports and services. for students with, under O5.
Okay.
Yeah. Talk to your medical providers. Okay, thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.